Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. As we are always committed to arrange webinars, we always have a great range of regional networking events, webinars, and conferences, which will help keep all our members and non-members up to date with important issues in accounting, tax, and even a lot of non-tax matters as well. Like today topic is project management for CFOs. So, as a IFA, just a little bit introduction of IFA as well. As IFA was established in 1916, and the Institute of Financial Accountants is an internationally recognized professional accountancy body. We are a full member of IFA, International Federation of Accountants, the global accounting standard setter and regulator. IFA is the part of IPA group, which is the world largest SME-focused accountancy group with more than 50,000 members and students in 100 countries. I really appreciate today the speaker, Dr. Hasnan Rizvi. He is with us and he's going to present his precious time on the project management for CFO topics. This presentation, this is more of interactive session equip to equip CFOs to leverage the project management and the management for driving financial value and strategic outcomes. So over to you, Dr. Saab, and you can have your detailed introduction and give us the insight on the topic as well.
Super. Thank you so much, Salman. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to present here. Good to meet you all. My name is Dr. Stan Rizvi. I am based out of North America. I have spent my entire career in the area of project management. I have a doctorate in project management from Schema Business School in France and a number of certifications in this area. And this is what I do for a living. So I thoroughly enjoy talking about this. I'm looking forward to a healthy conversation today. And welcome everyone from wherever you're joining. So we're going to talk about project management with a financial twist to it. Again, as you would imagine, when it comes to money, anything related to that, it is a critical constraint, a critical um, element in the decision making around project management, right? Regardless of what type of project it is. And so there's some key things that we want to talk about and understand, and also what would our role be in the CFO suite with respect to ensuring value is being delivered in the projects that we're working on. So the agenda for today, we're going to go through five areas. We're going to talk about project selection and prioritization. We'll then look at budget oversight and cost control, right? That's a key area for folks like us to have a critical, foot in the door there. We'll look at risk management for financial stability. They say that project management is risk management, and risk management is project management. Dr. Harold Kersner, who's one of the key advisors for PMI, the Project Management Institute. Many of you would know the Project Management Institute is the number one, it's the leading project management body, globally. There are others, of course. APMG does a number of things out of Europe, but PMI by far is still seen as the leader in this space for the most part, right? So Dr. Kersner says that project management is risk management and risk management is project management. That's a famous quote of his. I think there's a lot of truth in that, and we'll talk about that in the third segment of our conversation today. We'll then look at agile, right? So PM frameworks for agile decision making. That's become a bigger deal now as things become more emergent. And what does that word emergent mean? We'll discuss that very early on in our conversation today. And then finally, at the end of the day, nothing happens without measuring, right? So performance measurement, benefits realization, measurement, you name it, measurement just across the board is critical. And so how do we measure? What are the tools? What are the best practices? We'll tread a little bit into this area as well today. Okay. The whole idea is that we definitely need a strategic approach to project management for financial leaders. And that's not a romantic statement I'm making there. That's a practical, real statement. You know, a strategic approach to project management for financial leaders. That's the mindset we need to have. In other words, we need to have sort of a systems thinking approach where we're looking at the collective, the impact of a project across the suite of investments. I mean, a project is nothing but an investment, right? And so if we put on our investment banking hat, we have to look at every single project unto itself as how does it fit into our overall portfolio of investments, which would include projects, programs, and also the operations area as well. So all of this comes together, and that's how we need to have our discussion there today. Okay. Again, I will just in terms of logistics for today, we have a limited period of time, but I will along the way try to keep an eye out on the chat box. My apologies if I don't get to your questions immediately, but please feel free to punt them in there. If you are able to, if you want to ask a question along the way, please do ask. I will try to address things concisely along the way while ensuring that we get through the material that I'd like to cover for you. And by the way, after this, you're welcome to reach out to me, ask any and all questions, because this topic is very broad. And project management itself is going through a revolution, just like every discipline out there is, right? I mean, we're all talking about those two alphabets, A and I, artificial intelligence, right? And what does that mean? And how is this element of AI that's bringing in cognition into the non-human space? That's both exciting and scary, and there's a lot of unknown there. So there's a lot going on, and project management itself has tremendously evolved. I've been involved with project management for over 20 years now, and I've seen the evolution, but the race and the rate of evolution that's taking place in project management at the moment is just dramatic, right? It's almost difficult to keep up with it, thanks to things like AI and many other concepts out there that I would try to touch briefly upon. But feel free to ask any and all questions. Feel free to share your comments and insight along the way. Let's keep this going and let's keep this alive. Now, one of the first things I want to set expectations for and set the reality of the total. So I work with clients across the world. I worked with clients in North America, the EMEA region, you name it, across the world. I've had the good fortune and I've been blessed to have been able to touch projects across the world. Right now, the one thing that has become very, very evident is that we're living in a world where VUCA is increasing. So this is a topic that PMI, the Project Management Institute, specifically introduced into their content I think about 5, 6 years ago. And it was very well timed, because if you think about the world, I won't have time to go into the details of this acronym today, but if you just look at the words volatility, you and I can all agree that volatility is increasing in the world, whether it's political or economic or, whether it's climate related, you name it, whatever. There's so many factors, right? We could have a deep dive discussion on volatility and how volatility is on the rise, right? And then uncertainty. Now, you all come from a financial lens. You should know uncertainty, or uncertainty is beyond risks, right? So risk is something you and I have at least identified. We have perhaps some sense of, its scale and size and, probability and impact and, our confidence with respect to whether we could detect it. We have some sense of a risk, but uncertainty is beyond that. It's the Wild West. It's what PMI refers to as the unknowable unknown, right? And obviously with things like AI, for example, there's a lot of uncertainty in the space out there. There's a lot of uncertainty with the political climate in terms of what tariffs are going to do and what tariffs are doing, and you name it, right? The alliances and the partnerships that are forging a different economic landscape globally is affecting us locally wherever we may be. And then complexity. Complexity is beyond complicated. Complexity is where we've got multiple layers, right? So we live in a world where there's a multi-layered complex set of circumstances that are impacting what you and I are trying to deliver, which is value in each of our respective organizations. And then there's a sense of ambiguity. Ambiguity means things are not clear. As a result of all the V, the U, and the C, things are getting more ambiguous in terms of, what direction should we take, and what decision making should we have, and the old world where we had a very clear 10-year strategic roadmap. It makes almost no sense today, because who the heck knows what's going to happen 10 years from now, right? I mean, the universe is evolving so rapidly and dramatically that even the largest players in the world. So I have the pleasure of and the honor of working with some of the largest PMOs in the world, such as Aramco and others. Even they're looking at a more emergent approach to planning for some of their largest CapEx investments out there. So VUCA is something that we're going to keep in mind throughout the conversation, right? That very predictable, minimal variation, stringent approach to managing finances in a project may not always be the most opportune way to deliver value in today's world. Just a side comment there for us to think about as we go through the content this today. All right, so let's go through our 5 points that we want to cover today, folks. All right, number one, before we can start anything, we obviously have to select a project, right? And that goes through some prioritization exercise. There are a number of prioritization techniques out there, which I will just name for you. There's the Kano technique, the Moscow technique. There's Wischiff from the Scaled Agile Framework universe, and I'm happy to share those names separately. I didn't want to overload the slide content for this for today, but there are a number of prioritization techniques. We need a structured, organized, methodical way to prioritize, however you do it within your organizations. But it needs to be that. It shouldn't just be sort of an ad hoc, fly by the seat of your pants type of approach, right? And our role from the financial lens is extremely critical, right? We're looking at things to make sure that we're maximizing ROI, right? On the capital across the portfolio of investments, which, as I said, includes projects, programs, and even operations, right? We want to make sure that there's alignment between the investments that we're making in our projects and the ultimate strategic objective, the strategic themes that the adults in the room have given us direction to. What is the board of directors or our key shareholders that have directed us to move towards. We need optimal resource allocation in constrained environments, and that's becoming a bigger and bigger demand. I won't even say it's an ask; it's now a demand with increasing competition. Right, a new flavor to globalization now. Right, there's a new sort of confusing state of globalization right now, because the business world is evolving thanks to, again, the socio-political landscape evolving so rapidly. We're having to figure out the optimal allocation resources with all the other constraints that are in place, and really maximize the juice out of this in the most optimal manner. And when we talk about constraints, there are all kinds of constraints in projects. There's quality, there's risk, there's scope, there's customer satisfaction, and compliance issues, regulatory elements are constraints. All those things have to be kept in mind as you're providing guidance from a financial lens, right? We need to balance between short-term and long-term financial needs, right? At the end of the day, we definitely want to feed the long-term beast, but at the same time, we've got to get some wins along the way, right? We've got to keep the shop running. We've got to get some wins along the way. A, it's motivating for the organization. B, I mean, frankly speaking, if you're a publicly traded company, your investors want to see returns every quarter, and that pressure is on you, whether you're Wall Street or Bay Street or London, wherever you may be trading. Again, we want to be able to make decisions that have a basis, right? A basis for your decision making. So, in project management, we say, if you're going to make an estimate, if you're going to give me an estimate, you better give me a basis for that estimate. If it's going to be $100,000, where did you come up with that estimate? What drives that, right? And so we want insightful, defensible, data-driven investment decisions as well. That because that's an important element of the entire equation here. All right. So again, we're looking at how CFOs can drive strategic value through effective project selection here. And our role will come into existence via these 5 bullet points. So we are the gatekeeper for this one here for sure. Moving on, then there's the project selection itself, right? And what are some of the metrics that we would look at? So this is, I'm not gonna educate you on these topics. This is an area that you all are experts on. I'm gonna go with that assumption. Whether it's ROI, NPV, IRR, payback period, or a combination of a few of these metrics, right? These are some of the simple ones that we would typically look at, right? In project management, we're particularly typically interested in NPV. That's traditionally been a more popular metric that we look at. Payback period is also very, desirable as a metric for many executives that I work with and different clients. So it just depends on obviously where you work and who you're dealing with. But nonetheless, traditionally, PMI and other entities out there have promoted NPV and payback period. That's not to say those are the only two we look at. We would look at other metrics as well that make sense. So there's got to be a framework for selection, right? Where we're going to combine quantitative metrics with strategic alignment. We'll weight the criteria based on specific organizational priorities that are being driven from the top. And again, of course, we have to take into account our reality, our sort of spider web of constraints that we have, and what opportunity, what are we giving up, right? In order to consider if we're giving up project B for project A, does it make sense? We do that sort of, uh, you know, uh, affinity decision making. We call that where we compare A to B and see which one makes more sense, perhaps sometimes in that regard. That becomes very, very important. Now, having said this, I got to tell you, the data that PMI has on this is really, really interesting. As much as we push, as much as we push for intelligent quantitative metrics and deep dive Excel spreadsheets to help make decisions around here and selection criteria, which is what we should do. The reality is that over 70% of the decisions for projects come from a qualitative lens. The executive chambers have some direction or insight and agreement um, that drives qualitative decision making around the selection of projects. Nonetheless, the quantitative metrics, I think, helps them indirectly, at least, in helping make some of those decisions. So coming back to that, that was just a side comment, but it's an important one for us to keep in mind. So when we're going to look at things, there's some frameworks that we could look at potentially, right? So it could be like a scoring matrix where we look at number of factors, strategic, financial, operational, and others, right? We may be wanting to make a geographical impact in a particular region, and that may be a factor in our decision making. Again, strategic alignment is always important, right? Mapping our project to strategic objectives becomes very, very valuable in almost all instances. And of course, some financial threshold filtering. We've got some thresholds. As long as we're above that, then we're good to go. If not, then that would be a project that we would not consider based on some criteria that we as a leadership team perhaps have established, right? So this is where you would partner with other C-suite members across the organization who would and you would reach some common agreement there. You would obviously, being the champion for the financial side of the equation, you would perhaps have to educate your colleagues and partners. But this would be something that you would get some buy-in and agreement from others in the room as well. So some of the best practices around evaluation, again, is that we've got to have some sort of standard evaluation criteria, right? Otherwise, we'll be comparing apples to coconuts, and that will not be a comfortable scenario for us, and that could be a cause for confusion, conflict, inconsistency. And then again, if you go further down the chain, this could also create issues when it comes to audits and compliance and things like that. There isn't a standardized approach to this, right? It could raise all kinds of bells and whistles for us in a negative way down the road. We'll have to combine qualitative with quantitative, as I said earlier. A lot of decisions take into account some qualitative elements that uh, that are important. We have to understand that the subjective context of scenarios, that sometimes the numbers just don't always highlight completely. Um, and then we'll have to review things along the way. So just because a project has been selected, and even if a project is being executed upon, right, does not guarantee or should not guarantee that we will take it to its full fruition, right? The world is dynamically evolving. And so it is highly recommended. When I work with clients, I definitely recommend a serious quarterly review of all our projects to ensure that it still makes sense to continue, right? Otherwise, we've got the sunk cost, we chop, we move on, we reallocate resources to something that's more valuable. But again, of course, it has to be done. I'm making this sound simpler than it is. There's a thought process there, obviously, to it, and there has to be a structure to that as well in that regard. Um, you know, um, just looking at this top right-hand corner, just as a quick sort of, like a little quick, I call this the quarterly, tool to just give us a quick sense of where we may want to target things in terms of, prioritizing and evaluating projects. If we can do some really high value things that can get us some quick wins quickly, you know, let's attack those and let's get those wins immediately. We're getting some really amazing bang for our buck and we're doing it quick. There's a technique out of the scaled agile framework called WSJF, WSJF. I'd encourage you to look that up later on. Stands for weighted, shortest job first. There's a formula behind it and what have you. WSJF basically drives this point home very, very, effectively. And it is a factor to take into account when we are looking at things. Strategic, high value projects that are going to take longer to deliver. We need to carefully take those into account. It's going to be a longer term commitment. And it's sort of a long-term partnership. When you're getting into a long-term partnership, you want to think it through. Is this an alliance that we want to keep for the long term? And so that needs to be carefully thought through, obviously. When it comes to the low strategic value items that are going to take longer, we'll do those when we have resources available, um, you know, and of course, the things that are the lowest priority, absolutely, we're going to avoid doing those. And so this is a great place where we actually also have very deliberate discussions about what not to do, right? So one of the meetings that CFOs need to have on their calendar monthly or with some defined sync and cadence is a what not to do meeting. You may want to name it a little bit more romantically nice than what I'm saying, but something to that effect, right? Where we're talking about things that we need to take off our plate because we have other more interesting, more valuable things to attack. Okay. The next thing here again is budget oversight and cost control, right? Naturally, this is a place where that we need to play a significant role. Now, the numbers are not very favorable here, unfortunately. All right. These are metrics I've got from PMI. Project Management Institute, this is data from 2023. That's the latest set of data I could find. Budget overruns are impacting 85% of the major projects globally, right? They're averaging about 27% above initial estimates. Now, is that a good thing or bad thing? That's debatable. Our initial estimates, how reliable are our initial estimates in a world of VUCA today? Should we be shocked and surprised at 27%? I mean, obviously, the executive chambers wouldn't like to see a 27% average above the initial estimates. But nonetheless, there's a discussion to be had there. that we could have offline. And again, the second one is I find very powerful. Early intervention can reduce financial impact by up to 70%, right? So there's a very proactive approach where we are proactively monitoring with using tools, basic project management tools such as earned value management, right? Um, is something that we can very easily, any Excel spreadsheet can help you do. You don't need you need some fancy financial tool for that. I'm not an accountant, and even I can do that. So if I can do it, anyone can do it, type of thing. So we've got to maximize financial efficiencies, right, while delivering project success along the way. Obviously, these numbers where 85% of major projects are seeing an average of 27% above initial estimates doesn't sound very exciting. Uh, for those of us who are sitting in the financial section of the building. So we need some advanced forecasting methods to help us manage this insanity, right? So there's zero-based budgeting, right, where we start from zero each period, where we again require a justification for all expenses. This takes more time. It's a commitment. It's basically a full re-estimate every quarter, right? Every period. I'm assuming that most of us will work in a quarterly cycle, right? There's a little bit more of a heavy lift there, right, from that perspective. But some organizations are liking it. Some of the major players, for example, in the Arabian Gulf region, are switching to this because it's such a dynamic space, and there's such a need for value maximization from the same dollars and reals and dirhams that there's a push to really look at zero-based budgeting. It's a heavier lift, but again, now we have automated tools, we have AI coming into play that's helping make some of this a little bit easier to manage, but nonetheless, it is a heavy lift. Another option is rolling forecasts, right? So as we're continuously updating beyond fiscal year and for improved agility. This is called lean portfolio management, LPM, right? Again, I would refer you to the Scaled Agile Framework website and their repository of knowledge for getting more details on lean portfolio management and this idea of rolling forecasts. And then there's driver-based planning, right? So there are key business drivers that are driving our financial outcomes. And so the decisions behind it, right, the approvals and the governance and the decision making we have behind it is tied to these financial outcomes, which are tied to key business drivers. That's another approach that some of the clients that I'm working with are taking as an approach. So, or some combination thereof, of these three is also an option in that regard. Okay. My personal favorite, which isn't very comfortable always for the CFO's office, is the rolling forecasts area with lean portfolio management, just because we're living in a world with things are so emergent, that I find that one to be it's a little bit there's a little bit of that discomfort with the full lack of full predictability, but it's a little bit more real, I think, in some capacity. And then, of course, there are different cost estimating approaches. For example, the 3-point estimating, right? That's the PERT estimate that has been around since the 1980s, came out of the construction industry, but frankly speaking, I think it makes sense for every industry out there, virtually. So you look at, three numbers: your worst case, best case, most likely, and then you throw into the PERT formula and get yourself an estimate. That makes a lot of sense, obviously, in today's world, taking into account again the VUCA factor, which I've been talking about. But again, these numbers are not coming out of the sky, right? There's a basis for these numbers, right? We're always relying on some basis, some reliable source. So we need, to reach out to experts, those who've been there, done that, to come up with these estimates. Those of us sitting in managerial chairs estimating things, not always the best approach. We need to get down, let's go down to the factory floor. The Japanese taught us Gemba decades ago. Let's do some of that even with our estimating. Let's go down and ask the actual doers for estimates, right? For example, Agile pushes for that a lot, right? The team members themselves will estimate. That is the estimate that'll roll up to the executive chambers. In theory, that sounds good if it's practiced. I don't know how heavily that is fully practiced in organizations, but nonetheless, that is a thought there. And of course, we'll have to track things along the way, right? We need tools of all kinds there. So real-time budget versus actual tracking, variance analysis. We need certain thresholds in place. For example, CPI, if it hits less than 0.9, it would, perhaps, I'm working with one of the military clients in the Gulf region, and for them, if it hits 0.88, then the project manager and the project cost manager will get an invitation into the executive chambers to explain what's going on because you've hit that particular amount. Anything above 0.88, you're okay as long as you're being able to explain that. But if it goes below 0.88, then that is a red flag, and you get invited to have a conversation and explain and have an intelligent, mature discussion on what the options are. It's not like we're not here to play the blame game. It's more about let's be solution oriented, and these threshold alerts are put in place so we can proactively approach solutionizing around this, right? Again, cash is king, right? And so forecasted cash flow projections are absolutely important. At the end of the day, we have to pay our bills. And so that's an important set of data that we need to keep track. And then, of course, the workflow metrics. We're looking at things like work in progress, WIP limits, uh, how much lag time, lead time do we have? Where are we seeing MUDA, Mura, Muri, the types of waste and inefficiencies and overload in our workflow that the lean world has taught us. Again, my apologies that I'm not being able to spend time to explain all those terms to you because of the time constraint today. But you're welcome to look those words up: MUDA, MUDA, MURA, MURE, MUDA, Mura, Muri, the three M's that many attribute Toyota to be credited for those ideas coming practically into play. It's from the lean world. So those are some factors you want to take into account when you're looking at the workflow and the metrics associated with that, right? So again, you want to make sure that that our financial universe is included in the single source of truth that is presented to the CEO, the board of directors, and other key decision makers and partners along the way, obviously, right? So we want to look at genuine metrics, right? Genuine metrics such as KPIs that actually are the real genuine KPIs. And that's a struggle that I find that sometimes quite a struggle in, the last 2, 3 clients that I've worked with both in North America and the Arabian Gulf. Which KPIs make sense, right? For us to track. I mean, we don't want 500 KPIs. We want the key, right? The key performance indicators, not just a bunch of, bucket full of performance indicators. I mean, we're looking for the key ones. And so, which are the vital few, right? That are really, important. And of course, we need to have at least a couple there around financials that are absolutely critical. We don't want just a bunch of vanity metrics that make us feel good, right? We genuinely want to be good, not just feel good, right? Um, and then we need clear threshold definitions to be clear, so that you and I are measuring things with the same measuring stick. Otherwise, there'll be measurement system error there and MSC, and we don't want that introduced in our universe. Okay. Again, how do we prevent budget overruns? I mean, goodness gracious, we're saying that 85% of the major projects in the world are having budget overruns. Again, I could debate whether that's a crisis or not. I mean, again, because it's such an emergent world, I may take a CEO out to coffee at Tim Hortons and try to convince him or her that may not be as bad as the number sounds, but nonetheless, at face value, at least it doesn't sound very comfortable, right? So we need some proactive control mechanism, right? We obviously need a change control process that is looking at the financial impact very carefully, very proactively. Um, any mature PMO should be doing that. If we're not doing that, that's sort of like the fundamentals of the initial PMO that we set up for any client. or when we assess any client, that's one of the first things we look at. What's the change control process, and how significant a role does financial impact play amongst the other various elements as well that are looked at, such as scope and schedule and quality and risks and all those other elements, right? And then scenario planning, simulating situations, right? Modeling out uh, worst case scenarios, best case scenarios, all those kinds of factors are also critical. Right? We can learn a lot from the business continuity world and the disaster recovery world in this space. The BCP, business continuity planning, disaster recovery planning. Um, I've had situations I've dealt with natural disasters and like hurricanes and earthquakes and those type of scenarios, which I don't wish upon any of you. But those real scenarios, they weren't fake things. Once you live through that, then you appreciate the proactive control mechanisms that are put in place prior to such an incident occurring, right? And so we don't want any earthquakes, we don't want any hurricanes in our projects from a financial lens. At least that's a key element that we have a lot of influence over. So you want to make sure that that is taken into account with a very proactive lens. So you use tornado diagrams, and you use if it's a more sophisticated, more expensive project, then you use things like Monte Carlo simulation, um, and things of that nature to look at different scenarios, right? And then contingency reserves. For example, does 5 to 15% make sense or not, right? For different tiered reserves, do we, for example, if we're doing an AI initiative right now, I'd say 15% is nothing, right? You may need to put even more there. And this is just a sample on the right-hand side that, what range is comfortable for us in terms of reserves, contingency reserves, then management reserves, and then activity-based reserves, or a work package level reserve. You may assign a reserve at different levels in the project scope of work that is being done, and you may assign different percentages to these different tiers depending on the type of risks and uncertainties that we're dealing with, right? As well as the skills and the practical know-how that we ourselves have, or our partners that we're partnering with to deliver these valuable outcomes for the project. So, early warning systems, folks. Obviously, variance thresholds. We need to establish trigger points, such as a 10%, 5%, 15%, right? I gave the example of this uh, military entity for this government in the Arabian Gulf, where CPI goes below 0.88. At that 12% variance, you're getting a call, and you have to go out and then we have to have an intelligent, serious discussion on what's going on with this variance and what should we now do. Of course, before that, we're also reporting, so the people are typically seeing that we're trending towards that dangerous 0.88 in this particular scenario, right? So we need to establish thresholds that make sense for our own entity, or our client's entity, for making recommendations to an external party, and take that into account. Again, we look at the rate of spend, the velocity of spend, the burn rate, right, against the planned expense. We need to reconcile our funding limits against that, make sure that the rate of spend, the velocity of spend is acceptable, especially with a lot of like government entities. I was working for the Canadian government, and we'd get funded for the entire fiscal year. We had to make sure that that burn rate was at a rate that we would be able to, utilize those funds for the 12 months. So even though projects don't burn funds at a consistent rate for 12 months, we had to maneuver that to ensure that the funds lasted us for close to the 12-month mark, because the entire fiscal year is what the federal government expected us to feed our project resources. There's a job creation side to things when the government spends and things like that along the way. Again, milestone validation, right? So again, genuine validation of deliverables, right? So if we're dealing with a vendor partner, we want to make sure that inspection, or even if it's more formal as an audit, has some structure to it before payments are going out, including things like awards and incentives, or even the reverse, which is penalties, right? We look at all those things very closely, and we need those early warning systems in place. Risk management. In the beginning of this conversation, I said to you that risk management is project management and project management is risk management, right? So our role is not just reporting financial risk. No, of course not. We're actively managing it, right? I mean, we are knee deep in this, right? So we're looking at all kinds of financial risks, whether it's liquidity, currency, market volatility, you name it, right? Um, uh, Depending again on whether you're multinational, local, and which market you're in, that plays a significant role. Again, regulatory compliance, governance requirements around financials are extremely stringent. Again, depending on whether you're publicly traded, you're private, or if you're a public sector, and again, which jurisdiction you're in, or jurisdictions, plural sometimes for some of us as well, right? And then what operational risks are could impact our financial performance, right? Again, risks are things that may happen, right? So we're talking about the possibility of these things happening, right? Um, and then again, of course, we need effective risk mitigation frameworks. And mitigation is just we use the term mitigation frameworks, but dealing with risk responses, we have multi-pronged approach. We can either accept the risk, avoid it, transfer it, mitigate it, or even escalate it even further to the board of directors or some higher committee at times where we need to look at things from a very strict lens. So again, risk management is absolutely critical. This is not something that we're going to get away from. A very active, you know, my worst nightmare scenario type of, I like the old teachings from the Six Sigma world where we look at failure mode effect analysis, FMEA, those type of spreadsheets, which are very methodical risk registers, some version of that, even in agile initiatives where you're trying to move super fast, right? And go through emergent requirements. They're slowing down a little to look at risks, but a little bit more structure makes a lot of sense. So again, we can use all kinds of things to identify risks, right, and assess them. Risk registers, obviously, as I said, a centralized place for this source of truth for risks that we've identified. And again, there are different versions that I just mentioned to you, the failure mode effect analysis being a type of risk register that I like. Again, there are different ways to measure risks. Most organizations will use just probability and impact, those two metrics. I like the Six Sigma world. It also adds in the ability to detect. I think from a financial lens, you and I should appreciate that, our ability and our confidence that we'll be able to detect something like, for example, financial fraud, right? How confident are we in that? That should also be a valuable metric for us to assess and score when we're looking at risks. A lot of my clients like the idea, but they have difficulty in implementing that, so they just tend to stick to probability impact. But nonetheless, that is a thought for you all to ponder over. We can look at various risk identification tools, okay, like SWOT analysis, obviously expert judgment. Perhaps some of us in this room are bringing in expert judgment to this area with the experiences you have. You reach out to whoever it makes sense to get ideas on risks. Okay, we get a little paranoid here, is what I encourage. And of course, historical data analysis is also a good place, right? Where we can see some recurring risks. There's some common themes around risks that we can pick up. So the big players in the world, so the Chevrons of the world and the AIGs of the world and the Bank of Americas of the world and the SABICs and the Marafics and the Aramcos of the world, they have checklists for recurring risks that they have over years, developed, and those are used with different depending on the type of project. They will encourage the project managers and the project cost managers and the engineering cost managers to look at very carefully. Different risk assessment techniques. Again, the probability impact matrix is your quickest way to quickly prioritize. Then there are qualitative and quantitative approaches. Again, you'll do as much assessment as makes sense for your project, right? If it's a low financial, spend type of project, then we may not need to do heavy duty quantitative, such as Monte Carlo. We may not have the budget for it, frankly speaking, right? Um, and again, what are we going to do in terms of the mitigation strategies? We will typically have in our domain of influence and control the buffers, right? What you want to call the various types of reserves. So the different liquidity buffers, we'd have some management reserves that we will hold on to very dearly, very closely. Right. That would be uncomfortable for the project team to come up to and ask, right? So we want to make it a little bit challenging for them, right? But obviously it's there for the right reasons. And then, of course, contingency reserves, we'll monitor those carefully. We're not just giving free money away to the project teams to spend these contingency reserves. No, they're being spent with justifiable reasons, right? So we're monitoring and controlling that. We're looking at even activity-based reserves sometimes and work package-based reserves as well sometimes, depending on, we would maybe establish control accounts over certain sets of work packages and the spend on it. So, we, depending on how sophisticated a project it is and how complex the financial controls need to be, we would have a multi-layered approach to the buffers there. We may have a hedging strategy, obviously, right? Especially where we're dealing with the market with certain commodities that are fluctuating, or if we're dealing with markets where exchange rate risks are more prevalent, that may be a bigger concern for us. And again, we have different financing channels, whether it's self-funding, with equity, with debt, you name it, whatever it may be, but we have multiple channels in those categories as well, potentially, if that is a viable option for us. And of course, throughout this, we've got to keep the shop running, got to keep the lights on. So the operations must continue smoothly. We must at all times, it is non-negotiable. We must at all times ensure regulatory safeguards at all times. Absolutely, right? And this requires a significant education on our part. We need to understand, for example, the dramatically increasing threats associated with cybersecurity, for example, right? I'm going to tie that in with AI as well. So cybersecurity, the AI cybersecurity threats, and just cybersecurity in general. Many times, when I deal with the CFO's office, I see that an appreciation for that is lacking, or an understanding for it is lacking. And so I think we need to spend a little bit of time to educate ourselves in that area. All right. I've been talking a lot, folks. I hope I haven't put anyone to sleep. Everybody still awake? We're going to talk about agile now, just real quick. So there are a number of frameworks out there, okay? And you know, these frameworks provide us as CFOs an approach to tracking things effectively, right? So in Agile, for example, typically we have 2 week cycles of work called iterations or sprints. And then many organizations that are doing large scale Agile are doing some sort of quarterly big room planning, which in the safe world, for example, is called PI planning. Again, throughout all these touch points, there are metrics that are being shared up, right? From the team level all the way to the executive chambers, right? With the consistent template, the same consistent metrics, or the same duration, so we can compare apples to apples across the board, right? Um, so we want to get as real-time visibility as possible into project performance. In the agile world, worst case scenario, you'd be 2 weeks behind, which is not too bad in most scenarios, right? And we want to implement similar rolling wave planning and rolling wave reporting across the board, even in your plan-driven projects. If not bi-weekly, then monthly. We used to recommend quarterly reporting up to the executive chambers with traditional projects, but I think that timeline may be a bit too distant now, with the world so changing so dramatically again, thanks to VUCA. So perhaps monthly makes a lot more sense there. To get agile metrics, project KPIs. You look at, again, you know, and earned value continues to be an earned value analysis, earned value technique continues to be a valuable you know, set of indicators for performance in the agile world as well, right? But we have some additional things that we look at in the agile world. They're a little bit easier, and the tools are great for this. So whether you're using ADO or Jira, what have you, a lot of these things are, if the data is put in properly by the team members, then the agile specific metrics just, they just easily flow up using a lot of the built-in dashboards that they have. So things like velocity, right? We look at burn rate, cycle time, release frequency, escape defects, level of technical debt, which in the long run could affect us financially. Debt is definitely not a good word. So those are some of the metrics that we look at. We look at WIP limits. Um, Again, I'm happy to discuss later if you have any questions on some of those metrics offline. And again, we need some easy decision making tools. So visuals, information radiators, right, become very important. Variance reports, milestone tracking systems, MS Project or Primavera, all those traditional tools do that for us. And Plan View, you name it, they're all doing that for us, and they're getting better with the emerging needs that we have. Predictive scenario-based tools, right? So again, modeling tools such as Latin hypercube sampling, Monte Carlo, decision trees to help us with expected monetary value, for example. And then risk-adjusted forecasting, where we look at risk as an anti-value sometimes, and we incorporate that into our calculations, becomes very, very important in that regard. Um, and then, of course, the fifth and final point here is how do we measure success beyond the delivery? So now that we've delivered the project, which is phenomenal, right? I mean, the Six Sigma world taught us this way back in the 1980s. Just because you've delivered successfully doesn't mean it's a success yet. I mean, we had a business case at the beginning that promised all kinds of stuff, but what have we actually delivered, right? And how is this actually living up to the predictions of the business case? And so we look at that again. We try to tweak and reassess. So that's in the DMAIC cycle, the Six Sigma rule. That C is where when we're controlling things, we're also looking at post project. Um, you know, are we really getting those post implementation benefits or not? And if not, then what can we do potentially to raise the bar there and improve some of the benefits that we are seeing there. So again, we're going to look at all kinds of benefits realization frameworks out there where we'll have obviously a baseline that we'll compare to, we'll track against it, we'll report, and then we'll try to optimize where we can make changes along the way, in that regard. All right. I yacked on for a lot there. I wanted to deliver a lot of information. My apologies. So I just wanted to get it all out, and um, I'm glad I did it just under the 1 hour that I was given. So I appreciate that, Soman. Thank you for giving me the 1 hour. It was a tight one there, but I appreciate it. So these are some of the key takeaways, folks. Um, I'm happy to answer any questions. You have my contact information at the bottom as well. I'd be happy to follow through with any other things that I may have mentioned that you'd like to see some more information on. I'd be happy to share that with you. Okay. Thank you, Chetan. I appreciate that. I'm glad that you were able to join on your weekend. I guess no one here has a hobby, eh? Everybody's taking up their weekend with talking about project management.
Thank you so much, Dr. Asnan. I think now we can have a few questions if someone would like to have. Um, so I have one hand raised.
Sure.
Yeah. So it's Amir. So Amir, I am going to turn on the mic. Yeah, you are allowed to talk.
Thank you, Philip.
Yes, Amir.
Thank you, Mohammed. Appreciate it.
Hi guys,
Everyone,
can you
thank
hear
you.
me?
Yes, Amir. We can hear you
Hi,
loud and clear.
thank you very much for, delivering the seminar.
Uh-huh.
It's very useful. It's given me a lot of information. I've got one question in regards to, the strategic projects. I understand it involves the high strategic values and low strategic value.
Mhm.
Um, how can we plan it better? For example, how can we apply to, say, for example, a catering scenario? If we're using a catering scenario, uh, how can we apply this more better to that kind of a scenario?
So you're coming from like you're talking about a catering enterprise and projects that are associated with running that, and how do we do the more strategic selection around that? Is that what you're talking about?
Correct. Yes, that's
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah, so whether it's catering or any other service, to be frank with your product, the philosophy doesn't change, right? The philosophy is that again, we sort of, I'll give you a simple example, right? So there are a
Yeah.
few techniques that we have out there. So I'll just put this in the chat box so you all can look at this further. There's one called the Moscow technique, okay? There's another one called the Kano technique. These are two prioritization techniques. I'll just leave these two with you to think about. Like I'll just super fast. The like in that catering scenario, what are your must-haves, right? The absolute must-haves, like those projects that are absolutely non-negotiable. They're perhaps your most important clients, or there's the sacred cow principle. The CEO is determined he or she loves this particular client or this particular initiative, and or you and I are not going to fight that tsunami, right? So it's an
Mm,
absolute must-have. And then the C's and the S's. The S's are the highly recommend, the should haves. The C's are the things that, yeah, if something drops from the M and the S because as circumstances evolve and we're not being able to do some of the mandatory ones and the highly desired shoulds, then one of the could ones could get pumped up there. And the W's are things that we've definitely determined that for the time being we're not going to do. They may be valuable initiatives, but for the time being we can table it, or we just decide we're never going to do it. It's a good idea, but we just don't have the capacity to do it, right? And then Cano, for example, has another. I love Cano's teachings. He talks about exciters, satisfiers, um, dissatisfiers, and then those that are indifferent. So again, in that, just real quick again, the exciters are those type of initiatives that are really going to get us out there and they'll be the key differentiators between us and any other catering provider out there, right? What's that exciting element, right? So, I often work with my financial clients and I say, hey, why should I open a bank account with you? Why not the bank across the street? They both give me the same things, a checking account, a savings account, a credit card, all the usual stuff, right? So what's your exciter? I mean, catering, I can go get catering from a myriad of places. What makes your initiative exciting? What's it going to do? What's your project going to do that's going to get me excited if I'm your persona that you're targeting, right? In that regard. So I like Cano from that perspective. You should look him up. His teachings were brought about in 1984. It's an old set of teachings and it's gotten refined over the years. And then he talks about these other categories as well, which I will pass on for the time being in the interest of time, if you don't mind. But good question there.
right. I've got another question, if you don't mind, if I
Sure,
can
sure.
present one more question.
Please.
Yeah. So my next question is in relation to key financial decision metrics. Uh, Now, because I am from a forensic role, for me, the precision and early alerts are critical for me. So,
Sure.
what I know you have covered the metrics such as, the ROI, NPV, IRR, and payback period, which helps assess the economic value and risk of a project.
Right.
One of the metrics I would like you to cover is budget variance. As you've mentioned
Mhm.
nowadays, VUCA, budget variance is becoming a major challenge due to the VUCA. Um, how can we better plan the budget considering VUCA
Yeah,
that can alert variances at the earliest stages?
sure.
Um,
Absolutely.
what strategic
That's a
planning can we introduce?
Yeah, great question there. So let me pull up. I have give me a second. I
Yeah,
want to answer this with I want to give this the due respect and make sure that it gets the attention. I had this in the back of my thing prepared just in case this would come up as a topic. So there's something I'm just going to show you real quick. I'm not, just so, and I'll be happy to send this. Salman, I'll send this over so you can share this with the attendees as well. Um, I mentioned briefly earned value management, earned value analysis. It's also called EVT, earned value technique, right? This is your early warning sign for things, right? As to whether you're heading in the right direction or not. And there are three metrics here: EV, PVAC. And I'll send this deck to you. You can walk. It's a self-explanatory deck. I think you'll understand it. And I'll send you a link to a video as well that you can look at. But what's really interesting here is you get some early indicators. So cost performance indicator. We also look at schedule because time is money, right? I think many of you will agree to that comment. And so we look at both cost and schedule here. And then what's really valuable are these two metrics, something called estimate at completion and estimate to completion, right? And again, they're very easy formulas, as you can see. I mean, there's just two elements to it. Now, within EAC and ETC, there are some other variations of this. So I will send you some additional, I'm making a note to send you some additional information on this. Depending on how things are going, you may need to use some other formulas to take into account. So for example, your initial estimate, let's say, right, that you got a budgeted approval for was, let's say, $1 million, right? And now as you're progressing through the project using EAC and ETC, you realize that that $1 million is way inadequate. You were like completely off, right? Which happens sometimes, unfortunately, for a number of reasons. And so what we would do there is we would, use one of these techniques. Again, look, the best time to give bad news is as early as possible, right? And that information, the earlier you have that, the earlier you can proactively sort of, come up with approaches to manage that more effectively. So project management does have this EAC and ETC as your tools to help you with that in that regard. And again, I'll make sure that I send over this information to you so you can take a deeper look at that.
Thank you very
Yeah,
much. Sorry, someone. I was also going to say thank you very much, providing that, Dr. Rizvi. I really appreciate it. And
No
thank you,
worries. My
someone, for that
pleasure.
as well.
My
yeah.
pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you.
Okay.
So next one is A Sheikh. I mean, you are also allowed to talk if you would like to say any or ask anything. Yes, A Sheikh.
Yes, good evening, gentlemen.
Yes.
Most probably my question would be in continuity of Simon's question, which was
Mhm.
related to cost being overrun, because I am from a background of construction industry, and it's been a very common practice in the GCC countries that mostly you start at point A, and when the project is near to completion, the finance is in total surprise of finding out that the budgets are overrun. So I believe that the document you will share with us will help us out on that. But we would surely like to receive information that how the people in finance can take proactive approaches that can help them out to avoid those surprises
Yeah.
at the end of the
No,
project.
no, absolutely. Let me tell you, this and you and I will agree on this. I know I'm preaching to the choir, but this really, the surprise factor shouldn't I mean, the fact that we get surprised with this is a surprise.
True.
Honestly. Like, I mean, if you think about it, I mean, there's no magic to this, right? I mean, the solution is simple, and I get it. I live in the real world, so I understand. And trust me, I feel your pain, because I suffer along with you. Okay, the reality is that the only solution is for us to have a seat at the table as early as possible and make sure that the metrics and the measurements are genuine. I mean, a lot of projects, project organizations will use, and that's why it almost I get very nervous when I see the typical sort of rag status. We call that rag status. Where a project is identified as red, amber, or green. Right? If it's green, that means kullu tamam in the Arab world. It's like all is great. Let's just keep rolling. Let the reals keep coming. That doesn't make any sense. Because what if the green is a false green? And so you need to go a little bit deeper. I had a manager years ago. I was working in Redlands, California, and I had a manager when he would see green, he would dig deep into our green. I mean, he would make me sweat to validate that that is a genuine green. And sometimes his questions would raise the alert that this really isn't a green, right? And so just because I say it's a green doesn't mean that the CFO's chamber should say, yeah, that's a green. It's all good to go. No, we need a deeper dive. We really need to confirm that. So that's really what's happening. We're getting these false greens along the way. And so that's why perhaps OKRs are a better approach, KRIs, KPIs, a combination of those might make more sense in that regard, is what I would say there, to be honest with you. But we need to have a seat at the table earlier and as a trusted challenge partner. So we don't come in as a police force, because a lot of times it's the tone and the rapport that you build. When I question you, I'm coming as a trusted challenge partner. And if you see me as that, then you will be much more transparent and comfortable, where you're not feeling like I'm judging you, right? But we're here to be solution oriented. We're here collectively to ensure that we don't have surprises later. Because again, as I say, the best time to get bad news is as early as possible, right? In that regard. Good question there.
Thank you very much. And I just like to add from my personal experience that we do agree what you are already mentioned earlier, that minor tweaks which are coming during the course of time when the project is still at their early or middle stages from the project management office, they do help out the finance department because, understandably, they make logical sense. They provide us with documents such as, variation orders, or you call it additional works, or the changes that are coming affecting the cost in terms of inflationary matters. But we all agreed that surprises should be detected at an earlier stages.
Right, exactly, as early as possible. That's the secret to the sauce, and that's true for the finance side. It's also true for many other people who need to have a seat on the table. So yeah, good comment there. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I want to go on to a question that Olade Pupo has in the chat. Can the CFO take the role of a project owner? It depends on the type of project, frankly speaking, and it also depends on the type of governance model you have within the organization. Yeah, why not? I've seen CFOs be sponsors for many projects. A sponsor is the owner of the project. Now, does the sponsor need to sit there? Like for example, King Charles is a sponsor for many things, but how much time does he spend on something? He may. I'm guessing just between you and me that maybe he delegates a lot as king. So maybe he so there may be some others as ambassadors of his who are acting on his behalf. So yeah, I mean, as far as a CFO being the owner of a project, absolutely, why not? Or they may be a co-owner for some very large strategic initiatives that are going to have a very long-term impact, a very heavy financial impact. I would say yes, the CFO should be considered to be at least one of the sponsors if we're talking about a really large, huge footprint in project that's going to affect our organization dramatically in the years ahead. I would say they absolutely should. And you're right. Look, the comment that Olade Pupo you make about there's a disconnect between, frankly speaking, that's true about the CFO and the board, but it's also true about many others as well, right? The CRO could also say the same thing, that I'm trying to be very risk averse, and these folks are driving us nuts with taking all these risks. And the same thing could come from the quality department. The same kind of comment could come from other areas as well. The chief people officer could also raise that people are expecting miracles on the human resources side. So this is I don't want to use the word complaint, but this is an alarm that is raised by various levels in the C-suite. And yes, the CFO is not different there as well. So we just have to balance those key stakeholders' needs there. And right, that's where the role, frankly speaking, of a methodical, experienced project manager comes in to manage and balance these various important voices of the business.
Yeah. So I think we have one more, one question and then one hand raised. The question is, I believe it is.
So Usman has a question I'm seeing right here. Do we need to recognize revenue with respect to project as per IFRS 15? Isn't it? There are different criteria. Yeah. So I mean, the answer is I'm not going to give you a generic governance response here. The answer is it could make sense in your specific universe, right? Depending on the type of governance that your organization falls under. So I would say that, you want to, I'm not trying to cop out here, but I teach a lot of governance track things as well and consult in that area. But it's very contextual, very jurisdiction specific. It's a very important question you ask, but you need to go to your internal GRC type of personnel and get that clarity to make sure that that's included in the project lifecycle. I would venture to guess yes for you, but that's something that you need to confirm with your GRC area. But good question that you ask.
Vishal, would you like to ask? You raised your hand. You are unmute as well from my side.
From my point of view, as GCC is the most dominant in importing things, how it affects regarding like we are the middleman of main project as a subcontractor, how our
Yeah.
cost can be reduced, because sometime it happen during the freights everything will go off and our margins will be really thin. How we can figure it out, that one?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, again, that's where, this is another area that we are catching up on. There are more agile contract management techniques that are coming up with as a result of VUCA. So, the first thing is to have again, I'm going to repeat this one statement I made earlier, which is to have that trusted partner relationship. You know, most clients, right, that you're working for, so you're a secondary provider, it sounds like. So, at the second tier. So most providers, most partners want you to be successful, because if you're successful, you'll be around to help them continue to be successful, right? So we need to have that win-win mindset from both sides. So if I was coaching you or when I was coaching them, I'd say the same, I'd make the same comment. Um, a more agile approach to the contract would enable you to have built-in clauses that will allow for such variation to be incorporated. Again, it's not ideal for you. It's not ideal for the upper tier as well. But
Because what I'll say something, if you don't mind,
please,
because we
please.
mostly deal with the government ministry. Once they issue the LPO, they are not going to be flexible.
Yeah,
Like we deal with the like most of
yeah,
hardwares for the electric things. Once the
sure,
ministry
sure.
order, government order some LPOs, they're not going to be flexible. Anything happen, we end up get screwed.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, no, absolutely. I understand. And there again, what you'll have to do is I mean,
Because as
again,
per the
depend.
market, the profit margin is really thin. If go hi-fi, we end up paying so much
Yeah.
problem.
I mean, look, at the end of the day, we have to build in some reserves, and we want to win we want to earn the business, but at the same time, if you got thin margins, I mean, a decision has to be made whether it makes sense to partake in this work. I'm not trying to discourage you from doing the work, obviously, but that's just that's a decision that has to be made. Are you going to stay in the market hoping that these fluctuations will dissipate or will get mitigated? Perhaps it's a temporary thing, or if it's something that you're expecting is going to continue to, be very rapid fire over the next several years, then that's a decision that strategically your organization has to make. Do we stay, or do we, exit, or do we change our footprint in the region? Um, but yeah, that's a problem that is there for sure. I appreciate that. If there's some ability, again, as I say, without manipulating the system, there's some ability to deal with this through change requests. Again, not I really don't recommend that as a best practice for the client side, the government side, but if that's what it is, then that's what you may have to try to leverage as an option. I don't really have any magic pill for there, unfortunately, my friend. You know.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, I think we are done with the questions, and I don't see any further question in the chat or in the Q&A. So I'm moving towards the closing remarks. I wanted to extend my sincere appreciation for your engaging presentation, Dr. Hasnan, during this webinar, which is on project management for CFOs. Your insight on this topic was particularly valuable and have given us a fresh perspective on the topic. And thank you for sharing your experience so generously. It was a pleasure to learn from you, and I look forward to apply. Even I believe all the participants they will be applying what they have learned today in their work. Regarding participants, your presence and contributions were truly appreciated and added great value to our discussion. So have a I can say this like have a like nice or good evening. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.
Thank you again.